Hi, I'm Stephanie, and this time I'm back with another episode of Field Notes with Erik Vogt. Now, this time around, we're going to be talking about this concept of Gen AI and especially like token pricing. So, what I have been seeing online is that there's this kind of dichotomy of, on one hand, people are saying that, all of a sudden hiring back that junior programmer is cheaper than using AI to develop stuff. And then on the other hand, I've also been hearing about it being a lot cheaper now for folks to just kind of get in, dig in, develop apps, etc. themselves without having to pull in programmers, external departments, etc. So we have a bit of a dichotomy here. So Erik, on the localization side of things, how do you think this is playing out?
First thing, don't believe what you hear on LinkedIn because there's a lot of people who are pointing in opposite directions and having a lot of fun with it. And I think what they're picking up on in this chaos is actually that both are true, right? The tokens are getting cheaper, and there's demonstrated if you look at the actual data, there's no question about it. Moore's law and economies of scale are clearly driving unit prices down for tokens, but when you aggregate the different steps required and the volumes required, the volumes of tokens for different outcomes that you're trying to get to, they're diverging quite a lot.
Hmm.
So if you're trying to do something where if you're just doing a simple task like building a V1 of a website or V1 apps, it does a pretty good job relatively cheaply getting to that outcome. And for generic use cases, it's relatively cheap still, and it will continue being cheap. But the industrialization of it, if you add the different layers, then that's where things get a little bit more complex.
So, looking at this, do you think that tokens will continue to go down?
Yes, I think for basic text generation, there's going to be continued downward pressure. There's no question about that. There's competition, there's optimization going on with smaller models. There's
Right.
open source is out there. They're entering this. So whenever you have a competitive environment like this, all of the players are doing what they can to optimize the efficiency, both through more efficient data centers, through more efficient workflows, more efficient token utilization. Everything is going to continue being cheaper, but premium capabilities are going to be monetized, and that's when you think about it's this output thing is changing what it costs to get where you want to go as opposed to the unit price itself. And that's something that localization has a hard time wrapping their heads around because we think in terms of word as unit,
Right.
and we think of like it's cost this cost it's all these bundled things, but it all loads into this one price. Now with Gen AI and AI capabilities, there's different pathways that lead to different potential particular outcomes.
Yeah.
So the simple token prices are just not the whole story, and it can be very deceptive because, like for example, one analysis suggested that the per token cost for large language models is expected to keep falling by 60% to 60 to 7% annually at the hardware level.
Hmm.
So totally enterprise AI bills, but because they're consuming more, it's like Chevron's paradox, you're able to do a lot more faster. You can burn through those cheaper and cheaper tokens faster and faster. And I was doing this one exercise where I was putting together a presentation and I blew through my budget immediately. And it's just like, poof, you have to buy more data, buy more tokens. So yeah, what you're doing with them is mattering an awful lot.
So, from the localization standpoint, then, when we're looking at all of the different areas, what do you say as getting cheaper? So, what are the ones that the token prices are affecting it so it'll go down in cost versus the things that really might be even going up due to just the volumes?
Yeah. What's going to get cheaper specifically is the generation layer. Basic translation, summarization, rewriting, content extraction, classification, first draft, multilingual content. These are increasingly commodity capabilities, and they're going to be driving that price down. That means that they are no longer a strong basis for premium pricing by themselves. So, from a pricing perspective, any LSP who's delivering that the LLM, there's multiple things. It becomes a cheaper component of the delivery itself, right? So
Hmm.
it's cheaper delivery. That expectations, therefore, from clients are that the price goes down. And the alternative is getting cheaper too. So when you're looking at the differential between the automated translation and the human translation, it's getting bigger difference apart. So that I think is really for low risk internal comprehension use cases, which already have been at MT level for decades, for a couple decades now, especially since 2018.
Mhm.
There's rough translation, triage support, draft adaptation. All these things are going to be getting cheaper and cheaper, cheaper. For LSPs, this puts additional pressure on marketing and kind of the marketing messaging. Like if
Right.
your value proposition is just send us content and we'll send it back in a different language, the market keeps on pushing pressure down on that. Now the cost of the AI itself is also getting cheaper there too. So you're going to expect a smaller and smaller margin, which as we've talked about before, that puts additional pressure on external systems like project
Mm.
management and engineering to because that kind of core unit price is dropping. Those other things become more of a premium value of doing those other things effectively. So it's interesting, like the translation part of what an LSP does is not the hardest part of what they do.
Right.
And often people think that's what they are, but they're actually integrating these different sort of platforms and systems and tools and really the accountability layer that we've talked about before.
So is that, say, like that accountability layer, or are there other things as well that you see getting more expensive?
Yes, and that's where the model itself or the tokens are getting cheaper, but the
Mhm.
system around it is getting more expensive.
Okay.
So when you think from a translation paradigm, you've got style guides, terminology, translation memory, product documentation, screenshots. You've got multiple passes, and that's a big one because you can have sort of an empty pass and you have a one agent does one thing and one agent does another thing, and each of those agents is consuming tokens. And because of the nature of these large language models, you have to resubmit the query
Mhm.
multiple times
Right.
during a larger project. So that just adds up. It's a non-linear thing. It's not like you just load the subject from a AI's perspective. You don't just load the style guide once and you're done. You actually may need to resubmit the some parts of that data to the large language model because in between sort of segment one to segment two, it's done about a billion other jobs in the meantime. So longer context when you have RAG or search retrieval, knowledge graphs, all these things
Mhm.
put together, when you have quality loops, that adds multiple steps. Each of those kind of adds tokens. They're multimodal. Whenever it's audio, video, or dubbing, that gets very expensive very fast
Right.
because those are just a lot of data going through those channels. And then there's enterprise control and governance, which we've also talked
Mhm.
about before. But when you add kind of security layers, data handling, there's auditability layers, there's kind of multiple tracks where you've got to store things. I think all of that is adding a lot of complexity that's a little bit outside of what most LSPs usually think of. When
Mhm.
you're talking to a technocrat, like they're thinking in terms of optimizing this ecosystem, but this can very easily explode into a very expensive system,
Right.
even as the unit price is going down.
So then let's maybe take a step away from the client side stuff. As an LSP looking at this, what should they be doing?
Well, I think defending the old world order is getting increasingly difficult.
Mm.
And I think we were even doing a webinar back in January where I was hypothesizing that the word unit rate is under attack and that any of these models that continue to fixate on a unit rate per word are without thinking about how many steps are involved to deliver a particular output quality
Mhm.
are going to start becoming more and more irrelevant. So it's not that the word isn't a meaningful part of that equation because you can use it to extrapolate things, but I think when you think about this, it's really helpful to think about this in different tiers. So from a raw AI perspective, just without a lot of customization, just kind of pure in and out, that's great for low risk internal use. It's usage based. There's no publishability guarantee. There's nothing solid there that you need to worry about
Mhm.
consequences. That's the cheapest. And I think all of us are using that internally automatically. It's almost free and it's going to keep getting closer and closer to free.
Mhm.
Then when you go up to AI plus and automated QA, there's high volume but still low risk content. Then there's going to be usage or kind of a workflow fee that
Right.
starts kind of aggregating. Then if you add human review, that's going to get more and more expensive. And I think that's where economists would suggest that the human component of this is actually going to get more expensive because fewer resources are actually going to be qualified to do the part that we need. So that's going to get more expensive. Customer facing standard content is that's kind of tier three, I would say. And then if there's domain assurance involved, and this is where You're dealing with more regulated, you're dealing with legal, medical, product critical, brand sensitive content. The risk-based premium review, I think that price is gonna go up.
Hmm.
And I think that's where LSPs, when you're thinking about LSPs, best use cases to attack that tier 3 and 4 with with efficiency at the right level. So
Hmm.
there's kind of internal mechanics that you need to solve, resource allocation, efficiency, but the actual human costs per unit per hour are actually going up. So utilizing those more expensive hours becomes mission critical. So how much value are you getting per unit time becomes essential for LSPs. And then at the top, you also have kind of managed AI localization programs, which is kind of enterprise scale. That's going to be the most expensive from a compute standpoint,
Hmm.
even if there's no human in the loop. So as humans, if you take humans into that tier 3, they're absorbing risk because there are human eyeballs looking at it and they're fixing everything that happens. But as you get to more and more automated quality refinement and quality control, that drives the actual AI costs up. So
Hmm.
that's where you get this paradox happening, right? Because you say, wait a minute, the AI is getting super cheap. Why are my AI bills going through the roof? And it's because while you're now handling a lot more content,
Hmm.
if you arbitrarily stick it all in there without thinking about it, you can very easily consume an enormous number of tokens. And that is a tough mental shift for a lot of us in the industry who are usually thinking in terms of human time to be thinking in terms of AI tokenization costs as a primary driver.
Yeah.
And that's where you get that situation that we started with, where the engineer, it's cheaper just to have a junior engineer doing it because the accountable person and the human are all bundled into one block of cost
Hmm.
versus the complexity of that level 5 where you need to get that assurances together.
The whole package of things.
Right. So I mean, if I had to leave a tagline for this, the price really should follow the consequences of error. It's not about stacking margin on top of costs. It's about aligning the process to the right risk profile with the right combination of AI and human components that
Mhm.
delivers the output that you want. And I think that's the key idea in there.
Yeah. Okay. So to wrap it up, for the localization leader, what would be the takeaway that you would give?
Don't build your strategy around the assumption that tokens will always get cheaper or more expensive. Like both of
Right.
those are kind of fallacies if you look at them in isolation. You build it around allocation and you think about the cheapest model for the lowest consequence workflow. You're optimizing around efficiency. So you have the fewest number of steps and the fewest number of checkpoints, right? Less governance, less overload. And then you use premium models. And this is, we didn't even get to talk about this, but different models cost different amounts also. And
Right.
some of them are a lot cheaper than others per unit. And they have different quantitatively and qualitatively different outputs.
Mhm.
So I think choosing your model and which version of those models, which like, is it a thinking model or reasoning model versus something that's a little bit more instant. So the premium models, the grounding, and then experts and where you put experts in there, that's where you manage risk reduction and where you create value. There's opportunities to waste a lot of money by either paying for compute that
Mhm.
isn't adding value or paying for human time that you don't need. So it's all about kind of calibrating your ecosystem to deliver these outcomes that you want. The waste is using just the wrong level of assurance for a given job and then not putting everything in one pipeline and expecting everything to spit out the same results. Like this
Yeah.
one size fits all mindset is just obsolete. We can't afford that anymore.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Eric. And yeah, as always, great insights.
Thank you so much, Steph. As always, it's a pleasure. Have a great day.